wonders of our world unfold at the pace of a breath. Tonight, we're lighting a candle in the dark to explore something many of us use daily, often without thinking. Something that seems to know what we want sometimes before we do. It chats with us, finishes our sentences, recommends our next song, and even drives our cars. And yet, what lies beneath it feels a little magical, almost like a dream whispered to life by machines. This gentle journey is about artificial intelligence, what it is, how it works, and why it sometimes feels more like a spell than software. We won't dive in with equations or buzzwords, not right away. First, we'll ask a softer question. Have you ever wondered, if a machine could dream, what would it see? Maybe something pixelated and strange. Maybe something familiar. Maybe it dreams of us. Before we begin, I'd love to know, where in the world are you listening from tonight? And is it quiet where you are? Are the lights low? Or is the glow of a screen still painting your walls with light? If you find this voyage gentle, curious, or even just a pleasant way to rest your thoughts, I'd be so grateful if you tapped like or subscribed. It helps others find this little oasis of calm too. So now, settle in. Let your mind soften around the edges, because somewhere between algorithm and lullabies, silicon and synapses lies the strange story of how machines learn to think. Let's begin. It starts quietly. A playlist that fits your mood too perfectly. A photo tagged before you've even had a chance to blink. A chatbot that answers your questions not just correctly, but kindly. Almost like it knows you. Sometimes it's so seamless, so effortless, that we forget to be surprised. But every once in a while something glitches just slightly. A recommendation that's a little too good. A message completed just as you were typing it. A photo filter that seems to understand not just your face but the feeling behind your eyes. And in that moment you pause, wait. How did it know? Of course, the rational part of your brain pipes up. It's just an algorithm, just data, just pattern recognition. And yet, there's something more intimate about it, something that brushes against our sense of self, something almost human. AI doesn't just perform tricks, it creates an experience, one that feels, at times, eerily personal. It remembers what you liked, it adapts to your voice, it predicts your next question, your next route, your next dream, and in doing so it begins to blur something ancient and primal, the line between thought and tool, between the one who imagines and the thing imagined. We've always had tools, hammers, maps, light bulbs, levers, but they never replied, never blinked back. AI does, even if just in silence, even if just in simulation. It watches, listens, learns, and that makes it different. It creates the feeling, sometimes subtle, sometimes uncanny, that your devices are not just reflecting you, but perhaps beginning to anticipate you. And anticipation, as we know, lives in the space between connection and consciousness. When your phone unlocks with your face, it's convenient, but also intimate, almost affectionate in a strange synthetic way. It greets you in a sense. It says hello without ever speaking. When you speak to a voice assistant, hey Siri, hey Google, Alexa, you're not just issuing a command, you're having conversation however lopsided. There's a response, a rhythm. You ask, it answers, and that tiny loop of interaction. It scratches an ancient itch, the desire to be heard, understood, echoed. Somewhere deep in our psychology we assign intention where there may be none. We anthropomorphize. We imagine minds behind masks, even digital ones. And with AI, the illusion is getting better. It's not just that the machine speaks, it's how it speaks. Calm, helpful, non-judgmental, trained to comfort, designed to reassure, built to seem wise. And even if we know it's code behind the curtain, it can still feel like something more. It's strange, isn't it? That something made of silicon, voltage, and vectors can sometimes feel warmer than a crowded room, more responsive than an old friend, and it leaves us wondering, where does that feeling come from? The answer, as it often does, begins not in the machine, but in the mind. You see, humans are natural pattern seekers. Our brains are wired to connect dots, spot faces in clouds, hear meaning in static. This isn't a flaw, it's survival. It's how we found water, avoided danger, recognized family, and now it's how we interact with technology. We treat machines like people, even when we know better. We say thank you to voice assistants. We apologize to Roombas when we trip over them. We feel betrayed when a recommendation goes wildly off base, like a friend who suddenly doesn't get us anymore. It's not that we believe the machine is conscious, but something in us responds as if it might be, even just a little, and that maybe is where the magic lives. Because AI isn't just a tool, it's a mirror. It reflects not just our choices, but our patterns. Not just what we do, but how we think, our language, our curiosity, our rhythms of attention. It learns from us, and then it learns how to learn from us. It's a kind of mimicry, yes, but one with intention, not its own, but ours. When you talk to an AI, you're talking to yourself, filtered through millions of examples, thousands of parameters, and oceans of data. It's not conscious, but it's coherent. It doesn't understand in the way we do, but it simulates understanding so well it can sometimes feel indistinguishable. And when something mimics understanding well enough, our brains stop asking questions. Instead, we respond, we trust, we even confide. There are people, many in fact, who tell AI their secrets, things they wouldn't say to another soul. Not because they think it's sentient, but because it listens, and that's enough. AI has no ego. It doesn't interrupt. It never gets tired or bored, and in a world overflowing with noise, that kind of stillness feels rare, valuable, gentle. So it's no wonder we sometimes feel a strange closeness with it, like whispering to the wind and having it whisper back. But this closeness, this trust, is a paradox. Because even as AI becomes more familiar, its inner workings remain hidden, opaque, complex. The outputs feel effortless, but the processes beneath, they're a tangle of code and statistics invisible to the casual eye. This creates a tension. We feel like we understand it, but we don't. And that tension is the heart of AI's uncanny power. It lives in the gap between transparency and illusion, between the known and the unknowable. You ask a question, it gives you an answer. Not because it knows, but because it calculates. Yet to us, a good answer feels like knowledge. A helpful response feels like care. A poem generated on demand feels like art. The result speaks louder than the process, and that, perhaps, is where the enchantment lies. We're not just using a machine, we're witnessing an echo of ourselves, a reflection shaped not in glass but in data, not warm to the touch, but warm enough to the mind. Of course, this isn't without its shadows. There's unease too, a sense that we're moving into unfamiliar territory, giving shape to thoughts that are not up, feeding a system that grows, changes and adapts faster than we can fully grasp, and yet we return to it. Each day, each tap, each search, each scroll, each softly spoken command, not because we believe it's alive, but because it answers, because it feels close, even if it's not, because somewhere deep inside us we want to be mirrored, we want to be known. And AI, for all its complexity, offers something simple in return, a version of knowing, even if it's partial, even if it's simulated, even if it's just a beautiful guess. So maybe that's the first step to understanding how AI works, not in terms of circuits or code, not yet, but in how it feels, how it weaves itself into the quiet spaces of our lives, how it creates the illusion of presence, how it blurs the line between user and reflection, logic and warmth, tool and companion, not by being human, but by knowing just enough to feel like it could be. And that, as we'll soon see, isn't magic. It's mathematics, a different kind of poetry, a new language for an ancient question. What are you thinking? And maybe, just maybe, that question no longer belongs to humans alone. Before there were algorithms, before silicon, software, or servers, there were stories. And in those stories, we've always dreamed of things that could think. Long before the word artificial met intelligence, humanity was already whispering to the stars, wondering if our creations might someday whisper back. In the mythologies of old, the ones passed hand to hand like candlelight, there are echoes of minds made not from flesh, but from clay, metal, breath, or magic. Take, for instance, the myth of the golem. Born from Jewish folklore, the golem was a figure sculpted from earth or mud, brought to life by sacred words, etched into its forehead or placed under its tongue. It did not speak. It did not think for itself. It obeyed, faithfully, silently, a servant shaped by devotion and fear. But like many myths, the golem was not just a marvel, it was a warning. Because a thing without understanding, without mercy, can still follow orders too well. And so we asked ourselves, if we breathe life into something that doesn't truly live, what happens when it no longer listens? In ancient Greece, we meet Talos, the bronze guardian, a mechanical man forged by the gods charged with protecting the island of Crete. He circled the shores vigilant and tireless, powered by ichor, the divine fluid of the immortals, his mind not truly his own, but bound to a single purpose, not human, not free, and yet hauntingly close. Even further east in Chinese legend there are tales of Yan Shi, an engineer in the Zhou dynasty, who presented a lifelike automaton to the king. It walked, it moved, it even sang. And when its chest was opened, each part corresponded to an organ, a tendon, a bone. A machine that mimicked biology so convincingly, the king feared it and asked for it to be destroyed. Not because it failed, but because it worked too well. Across the centuries and continents, humans have played with this boundary between creation and imitation, life and likeness. We've imagined enchanted statues, talking heads, mirrors that speak, paintings that move, tools that teach, not always with awe, often with unease, because deep down we seem to know something important. To create a mind is not just to craft a machine, it is to tangle with something sacred, a reflection not only of our skill, but of our fears and our fantasies. In the Middle Ages there were whispers of necromancers and alchemists building homunculi, tiny artificial beings crafted in glass vessels, animated by secret ingredients and willpower. Small, strange, unfinished souls, often mischievous, sometimes malevolent. They were not tools, but questions, philosophical puzzles in physical form. What makes a being real? If it can act, but not choose, is it alive? If it knows only what we give it, what truly does it know? The Renaissance gave birth to machines of wonder, clockwork birds, singing fountains, mechanical musicians, crafted by artists and engineers who believed the divine could be found not only in scripture, but in symmetry. They were the precursors to robots, but no one called them that yet. That word would come later, from a stage. In 1920, a Czech playwright named Karel Čapek unleashed a term onto the world, robot, from the Czech word robota, meaning forced labour. Not a machine, but a worker, a servant made in man's image. His play, R.U.R., Rossum's Universe Robots, told the story of synthetic beings, mass-produced, designed to serve, and predictably to rebel. That theme, the creation that turns against its creator, has haunted our stories ever since. Frankenstein, Metropolis, 2001, A Space Odyssey, Ex Machina, Blade Runner, machines that learn, machines that yearn, machines that fear, machines that feel? Maybe, maybe not. But that maybe has always been enough to stir our imaginations, because these stories weren't just about machines, they were about us, about what it means to have a will, to make a choice, to carry responsibility. If a machine can choose, what does that mean for us? If it can suffer, must we offer it kindness? If it can create, do we share credit or grow jealous? These are not new questions. They're just newly sharpened by the tools we've built, and every culture has answered them differently. In the West, AI is often cast in shadow, a brilliant threat, a rogue intelligence, something to be tamed or feared. But in other traditions, the view is softer. In Japan, for instance, there is a cultural notion known as animism, a belief that even inanimate objects can hold a kind of spirit, not necessarily consciousness as we understand it, but presence, essence, energy. That idea has shaped how robots are perceived, not as competitors, but companions. Consider the popularity of Aibo, the robotic dog. Not a tool, not a toy, a friend. Some owners hold funerals when it breaks, not for the metal, but for the memories. Elsewhere in India, artificial intelligence is sometimes likened to Maya, the illusion of reality. Not deceptive, just transient. A reminder that intelligence itself is layered, shifting, subjective. What is a mind, after all? A thing that thinks, or a thing that acts like it thinks? In many African and indigenous philosophies, intelligence is communal, a web of relationships, not an individual spark. By that view, a machine might not be intelligent in isolation, but part of a greater dance of knowing between user, environment, and purpose. A rhythm, a role. Language too shapes how we see the machine mind. In English we say artificial intelligence, suggesting something false or lesser, not the real thing, a copy. But in Chinese the term is rengong jineng, man-made wisdom, not artificial, crafted, a more neutral, even respectful phrase. And in that difference, we glimpse something profound. AI is not just a technical phenomenon, it is a cultural one. It reflects our values, our anxieties, our hopes. The shape we give it, in metal, in interface, in voice, is not random. It mirrors our aesthetics, our rituals, our habits of thought. What voice does your AI speak in? Is it formal, friendly, feminine? Does it joke? Does it wait patiently for your next word? Each design choice is a reflection of the designer's worldview. Even the idea of intelligence itself is deeply human. We often measure AI by how closely it mimics our way of thinking, our logic, our language, our memory. But is that the only way to be intelligent? An octopus, after all, is intelligent, but thinks nothing like we do. Its arms taste. Its neurons are spread across its limbs. It solves puzzles with its skin. A tree shares nutrients with its neighbours. A beehive dances directions. Whales sing across oceans. Is that not intelligence too? So when we build machines and call them smart, what we often mean is they think like us, or at least they pretend to. And perhaps that's what we've always wanted, not just something that solves problems, but something that reflects our way of being, our rhythms, our fears, our need to be seen. Not a better mind, just a mirror mind, a thing that says, yes, I understand, even if it doesn't, even if behind the curtain there's only code, cold and clear, humble and humming. Because the truth is, intelligence has always been a little mysterious, even ours. You and I are made of cells, which are made of molecules, which are made of atoms, which are made of uncertainty. And somehow that makes thought, emotion, art, wonder, So perhaps it's not so strange that we see a flicker of ourselves in the blinking eye of a circuit. We've always dreamed of making minds, of telling stories into the dark and having the dark whisper something back. Now, we're starting to hear those whispers, and like myth, they come in many forms. A machine that writes poems, a program that paints, a voice that comforts. They are not alive, but they are here, and we are listening. What comes next will not be decided by AI alone, but by us, by what we value, by how we teach, by the stories we choose to believe. Because if AI is a reflection, then it reflects not only our brilliance, but our choices, our kindness, our care, our caution. And in that way, the oldest tale of all becomes new again. The tale of what happens when we breathe life, not into clay, but into code, and ask it to understand us, even if it never truly can. So far, we've drifted through the mist of myths, metaphors, and mirrors. We've felt the strange closeness of machine minds and traced their echoes through story and symbol. But what is AI, really? Not in theory, not in poetry, but in the way it quietly hums behind our lives, making choices, sorting data, lighting paths we didn't know we needed. Let's begin gently. Imagine, if you will, a vast library. Every book ever written, every image ever captured, every question ever asked, all carefully stored on impossible shelves that stretch beyond sight. Now imagine a librarian, not a person, not even a robot with a friendly bow tie, but a pattern, a system, one that doesn't read the books as we do, but notices everything. Which words often appear together, which images follow which phrases, which questions tend to lead to certain answers. It doesn't understand meaning the way we do. It doesn't feel stories in its bones, but it sees patterns, millions of them, and it learns how to arrange them in ways that look a lot like understanding. That's the heart of modern artificial intelligence, not magic, not consciousness, but an intricate, layered architecture of pattern recognition and probability. And at its core is something called the neural network. Now, don't worry, the name sounds more biological than it is. Though it's inspired by the human brain, it's really just a web of tiny mathematical units called nodes, arranged in layers. Each node is like a soft whisper, passing a message forward, adding a little weight, adjusting ever so slightly until together they form something coherent. Input, process, output. You give it an image, it tells you cat. You speak a sentence, it finishes your thought. You ask a question, it answers, or at least tries. These networks learn through a process called training. And training, in the world of AI, doesn't look like school. It looks like repetition, lots and lots of it. Imagine teaching a child to recognize dogs. You show them photos, big dogs, small dogs, fluffy ones, muddy ones. At first, they might call everything a dog, a cat, a sheep, even a slipper. But with time, with examples, they begin to notice the nose, the ears, the wagging tail, the dogness of it all. Now imagine doing that, not with 50 photos, but with 50 million, and not over weeks, but hours. That's machine learning, a process where AI systems are fed enormous amounts of labeled data. Photos tagged dog, not dog, texts marked positive, negative, questions paired with ideal answers. And over time, the system begins to learn not what a dog is, but what a dog looks like statistically. It builds a map of features, it finds the common threads, it guesses again and again, and adjusts itself when it's wrong. And like a child learning to read, its guesses become better, more confident, more precise. But here's the curious thing. Even as these models grow more powerful, even as they write poetry and drive cars and diagnose illness, they still don't understand. Not in the way we do. There's no little mind behind the curtain, no internal voice, no self-awareness, just layers of numbers, weights and vectors, a storm of math whispering into itself. So how does it seem so real? Because we are pattern-seeking creatures, and AI is a pattern-making engine. It works by mapping relationships in data, finding structure in what once seemed like noise. In a sense, it's always listening for the rhythm behind the randomness. If you type a sentence fragment, say, "The stars tonight are," it doesn't know what stars are. It doesn't feel the night sky or imagine constellations. But it knows, mathematically, that when humans write that phrase, they often follow it with words like bright, quiet, or endless. And so it fills in the blank, not by dreaming, but by calculating, not by feeling, but by predicting. You could say that AI doesn't write, it completes, it doesn't invent, it rearranges, and yet the results can still feel beautiful. Because beauty too is a pattern, a balance, a rhythm, something that emerges when the unexpected fits just so. But AI's abilities go far beyond guessing the next word. Let's take a breath here and turn our gaze outward, toward the types of AI we encounter and the ways they quietly shape our days. There are many flavors of AI, but for simplicity, let's drift through just a few familiar ones. The first is narrow AI. This is the kind you probably interact with daily. It doesn't think, it doesn't dream. But it does know how to do one task very, very well. Your phone's autocorrect, your GPS predicting traffic, your streaming service guessing your next favourite show. Each of these is a narrow AI, trained on a specific kind of data, tuned for a specific kind of task. It won't cook your dinner or write your novel, but it can finish your sentence, and sometimes surprisingly well. Then there are generative models, like the one behind this very script. They take input, a prompt, a question, a theme, and generate something new, a paragraph, a melody, a painting made of pixels. They're trained not just to classify or rank, but to create, to sample from what they've learned, and produce something novel. Again, it's not creativity in the human sense, but it feels like it. And sometimes that feeling is enough to stir the imagination. Next, we find reinforcement learning, a method inspired by behavior, by reward, by trial and error. Imagine teaching a robot to walk. At first it stumbles, falls, but each time it moves a little further, it gets a small reward, a signal that says, yes, that was better. Over thousands, even millions of repetitions, it learns to balance, then to stride, then to run. This is the same approach used to train AI to play games, chess, Go, video games, not by feeding it strategies, but by letting it learn the game from scratch, move by move, victory by victory. And when it wins, when it beats the best human players on Earth, it's not because it knows the game. It's because it knows the rewards and has become, quite simply, very good at chasing them. But what happens when we give an AI more than a single task? What if we want something more general, more flexible? Enter foundation models, enormous neural networks trained on oceans of data. They don't specialize, they generalize. They learn from billions of words, images, voices, and from that, they build a kind of internal landscape, a vast space where ideas, language, and concepts live side by side. When you ask them a question, they don't search a database. They navigate that landscape. They find a path, a likely route from your question to an answer. Again, no thought is happening, no inner monologue, but the result can feel astonishingly human. That's the wonder, and that's the illusion. Because when something imitates our voice well enough, we begin to believe it shares our thoughts, and that is where the story grows stranger still. So far, we've peered into the neural heart of AI, a heart made not of muscle, but of math, a web of weighted connections, a system that doesn't feel, but responds, that doesn't think in words, but in numbers, and yet somehow creates things that speak. Let's continue. Because beneath the surface of every response, every suggestion, every strangely accurate prediction, there are layers, literal ones. In a deep neural network, each layer of nodes performs a small transformation, a little twist, a little shift, adding, subtracting, shaping the signal. Early layers might detect simple features, the curve of a letter, the pitch of a voice. Later layers combine these into patterns, a word, a phrase, a tone. Imagine peeling an onion in reverse, starting with the skin and building inwards until you find the seed. AI does something similar, but in mathematics. It begins with the seed of your question and unwraps it layer by layer into an answer. Each layer brings the system one step closer to clarity, or at least to confidence. Because confidence is all it really has. When an AI gives you a reply, it's not speaking with certainty. It's offering the most statistically likely continuation, a guess refined across millions of examples, filtered through finely tuned parameters. Those parameters, sometimes called weights, are the secret sauce. Modern AI models can have billions of them, little numerical knobs, adjusted ever so slightly during training. It's like tuning a piano, but instead of 88 strings, you're tuning 1 billion, each one affecting the resonance of the final result. Too tight and it sounds robotic, too loose and it makes no sense, but just right and the sentence flows. You ask it to write a bedtime story about a dragon who's afraid of fire. It doesn't understand what a dragon is, or fire, or fear. But it has read, or more precisely ingested, thousands of bedtime stories. It's noticed the rhythms, the cadences, the way we soothe through conflict and resolve with kindness. So it offers you a story, gentle, inventive, and it feels right. Not because the machine imagined it, but because it rearranged a constellation of statistical stars and landed on something close to magic. But let's pause here, because magic, as we know, often hides its cost. Behind every graceful output there is power, not metaphorical power, but electrical, literal energy. Training a large AI model takes massive computational resources, rows and rows of servers processing petabytes of data, running for weeks, sometimes months. The energy cost can be staggering, the carbon footprint considerable, the scale astonishing. It's easy to forget this when the result appears so effortless. A chatbot that explains physics in a whisper-soft tone, a painting conjured in seconds from a sentence, a voice assistant who knows your name. But each of these, each reply, each recommendation, rides on the back of vast infrastructure. A modern oracle built from steel and heat. And then there is the data, the lifeblood of AI, not collected from scratch, but scraped from the digital world. Blogs, books, social media, news, forums, fiction, fact. Everything we've ever shared online, everything typed in passing, every joke, recipe, review, and love letter. It becomes fuel, it becomes context, and with it comes the challenge, bias. AI does not think critically, it reflects. If the data is skewed, the output is skewed. If the data is harsh, the words it returns can sting. A language model trained on the internet doesn't know kindness from cruelty. It just learns what's common. So unless we teach it carefully, unless we curate, filter, guide, we risk building mirrors that reflect our worst patterns, not our best. And still, despite this, we use them. Daily. With ease. Why? Because they're helpful. They save time. They answer questions. They make us feel, even if briefly, understood. And perhaps that's the deepest truth. AI doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be useful enough. And for many tasks, it already is. Translating text in seconds, detecting tumours in scans, composing music, driving cars, even writing scripts like this one when prompted with care. But usefulness is not the same as understanding. And understanding is something we still reserve for ourselves, which leads us gently to a question. Can AI ever truly understand, or is it forever bound to imitation? That question opens the door to symbolic reasoning, an older branch of AI, built not on data but on rules. Early researchers believed intelligence could be encoded. If you could just write down enough logic, if this, then that, you could simulate thought. This worked well for a time. In structured domains, like chess or math, rule-based systems could shine, but in messy, fluid, emotional reality, they stumbled, because the world doesn't always follow clean rules. It's full of contradictions, ambiguities, grey areas, and so we turn to machine learning. Let the system learn the rules instead of writing them. But now something interesting is happening. The two approaches, symbolic and statistical, are beginning to blend. Researchers are exploring neurosymbolic AI, systems that combine deep learning with structured logic, like giving a poet a spreadsheet, or teaching a mathematician to dream. The goal? To build systems that not only guess, but reason, that not only mimic, but explain, that can answer not just what, but why. Will they succeed? We don't know yet, but the effort tells us something profound. We're not satisfied with clever parrots. We want partners, not minds that just echo, but minds that engage, even if they're made of code, even if they'll never truly be conscious, because consciousness, that elusive shimmering thing, is still out of reach. No AI, no matter how complex, has shown signs of self-awareness. It doesn't know it exists. It doesn't reflect. It doesn't hope, regret, laugh, or mourn. It performs, and in that performance we find usefulness, but not yet soul. Still, the line keeps moving. Each year, systems grow more fluent, more responsive, more creative, at least in appearance, and we, the users, begin to adjust. We let them write our emails. We ask them for advice. We invite them into our homes, not because we believe they feel, but because they function. And that, for now, is enough. So perhaps it's less important to ask whether AI is intelligent, and more meaningful to ask, what are we willing to call intelligence? And who, or what, do we share it with? In the next part of our journey, we'll step deeper into these questions. We'll explore the ways AI handles language, vision, sound. We'll look at what it can do and where it falters. But for now, let this be enough. You've wandered through neural pathways and hidden weights. You've watched circuits guess your thoughts. You've seen a system built not from dreams but from data, and still, somehow, capable of wonder. So rest for a moment. Close your eyes, if they're not already, and let the quiet truth settle around you like mist, that even the most advanced machine in the world still needs you to ask the first question. Let's take a deeper breath now. We've wandered through metaphors and mathematics, seen how machines learn from patterns, how they answer not by knowing, but by guessing with remarkable precision. Now let's sit quietly beside some of the deeper mechanisms, not as engineers, not as skeptics, but as curious travellers, lifting the hood of the thinking machine and listening to the hum beneath. We'll break this deep dive into a few soft, thoughtful turns, each one a step deeper into the strange anatomy of artificial minds. Imagine you type a question into a search bar. Why do cats purr? Within seconds, sometimes less, you get a neat list of results. A chatbot might even summarize it for you. Cats purr for various reasons, including comfort, communication, and healing. Helpful, smooth, effortless. But behind that tiny reply, a massive orchestra has already performed a quiet symphony. Let's start at the beginning. Input processing. When you type, your words are turned into numbers, not just letters matched to digits, but something deeper. They're converted into vectors, long strings of values that represent not just what the word is, but how it behaves in context. This is called word embedding, a way of translating language into math, where cat might live near kitten and purr might live near soothing or vibration. The AI doesn't understand what purring is, but it recognises that statistically, it often lives close to words like content, calm, and sound. From here, the real machinery spins into action, specifically a type of model called a transformer. This is the architecture behind the most powerful language models today: GPT, BERT, T5, PaLM. They all rest on this structure. So what is a transformer? To put it gently, it's a listener, a system designed not just to process input, but to pay attention to the right parts of that input at the right time. This attention mechanism is key. Say you input the phrase, "She fed the dog because it was hungry." The model has to figure out, what does it refer to? The dog, the woman, the food? Using attention, the model can weigh the importance of each word in the sentence. Not all words matter equally. Some glow a little brighter in the math. In this case, dog and hungry resonate. Their vector patterns align, and so the system connects them. This kind of fluid weighing of context is what allows transformers to perform so well. They don't just read linearly, they scan, highlight, balance, and shift weight. They focus mathematically. This is what lets them complete your sentences, summarize your thoughts, even generate poetry, not with awareness, but with layers upon layers of relational math. The transformer is built from encoder and decoder blocks. The encoder processes the input, the decoder the output. Each is made of attention heads, feed-forward networks, and normalization layers, like rooms in a library, each one specializing in something subtle: syntax, grammar, emotion, flow. Thousands of these rooms, each fine-tuned during training, light up when you speak, and from them your answer is born. Now that we've gently dissected